Okay, let's look forward then in terms of the expansion of the airport. What is your vision for the long-term growth of the airport?
So I think in the short term, our view is that we should actually use the spare capacity that we already have. And we have got spare capacity in the system around London today. I think it's fair to say that Heathrow, from an ATM, an air transport or air traffic movement perspective, is broadly full. But that doesn't mean that they can't actually grow passenger numbers. They can increase the average size of aeroplane, and that will increase passenger numbers at Heathrow somewhat in the coming years. At Gatwick, we currently do about 34 million passengers, and we think that we can grow the single runway and the two terminals to about 45 million passengers. And we think that'll happen sometime around the mid-2020s to the late 2020s. And at Stansted today do about 17 million passengers, and they have capacity of about 40 million. So often people look at this debate and characterise it as though there's no capacity whatsoever today, when in actual fact that isn't quite right. Factually, there's a lot of capacity in the system. So in the first instance, we think we should look to utilise that spare capacity. Howard Davies, who is the guy who's running the Airports Commission, in the first instance is challenged at what are the short-term measures that can be taken to better utilise that capacity. And for us, we put our submissions into the Commission on the short-term measures just last week. And very much what we focused on were two things really. One is improve the rail links to and from the airports, make it more convenient, put the right rolling stock on for the express services, get rid of these gates, allow people to buy the tickets on board, which is what passengers actually want to do, and just make the airports very, very accessible. And make the rolling stock high quality so that when international guests arrive into the country, they actually have a great first impression and a great last impression as they go to and from the UK. What would the different options be of where a runway may be placed? What sort of facilities would be required? What sort of investment levels might be involved? You know, estimates would be somewhere between £3 and £5 billion would be the cost of an additional runway and terminal facilities, as well as contributions to improve surface access at Gatwick. So this is a significant amount of expenditure. And then you start to build into, you know, can you meet the environmental credentials that will be required on this debate? How do you compare to the alternatives of Heathrow or perhaps Stansted or the estuarial options? And then finally you start to work into preparing a business case. And what we're doing is working across all of those streams that I just outlined to see whether or not we can actually make this work. Our sense is we probably can.
Yeah.
And the vision that we're painting is a very different one to the one that you hear about from Heathrow. Heathrow, we believe, absolutely exaggerate this hub concept. They exaggerate the reliance of London and the South East on transfer passengers. And what you see actually on this chart behind us is how we think that airports in London and the South East should develop, not only over the next 10 to 20 years, but actually out into the middle of the century. And what we're proposing is, well, I suppose you could call it a constellation of two runway airports. You essentially have the hub, which is London, surrounded by the metropolitan area. You've got two runways to the west, Heathrow, which of course is the big issue of Heathrow. It's just in the wrong place. That's why it has such a massive environmental impact, because you have passengers flying on the airlines right over the city. You then put a second runway in the mid-2020s or sometime after that into Gatwick to the south of the city. The environmental impact at Gatwick, while still having to be managed very carefully, is an absolute fraction of the environmental impact at Heathrow. And then in due course, assuming that the demand's still there in the future, which we expect it to be, you would then put a second runway into Stansted, perhaps around 2040, 2050. And what you'd create is actually what I think was the objective of breaking up BAA. You'd create a network of three competing airports of a similar size, competing for airlines, competing for passengers, and actually serving the needs of London and the South East and distributing the economic benefit as well as distributing the environmental impact across the region. So this is what we're proposing. It's very different to what Heathrow are proposing. It's different to what the Mayor's proposing. But for us, this is what we think is right for Gatwick, and we actually think is right for the region, and that's why we're interested in having this discussion today. Airlinks can be very important to the local economy that's directly adjacent to the airport. So for ourselves, if you were to get a second runway at Gatwick, potentially you'd see the volume grow in future years. Will not happen at once. From about 35 million passengers today, could be up into the 60, 70 million passengers mark. Yeah. So the connectivity would be very, very attractive to the local business community, and those connections would encourage the investment to take place. Other benefits, of course, would be the employment that would be created at the airport. You'd go through different phases. You'd go through the construction phase. To construct something of a value of £3 to £5 billion, which is what the current estimates roll around at, clearly is going to create significant construction job opportunities at the airport, and inevitably many of those jobs will be from the local communities coming and working at the airport. And then, of course, the beauty of this plan is then for the longer run, you'd actually see sustainable employment in the operation of the airport for years to come. Yeah. And with that comes all of the opportunities for businesses to link in and to trade either in the ongoing operation or in the construction phase at the airport, as well as to quite independently set up the trade links backwards and forwards to the various different economies that we connect to.
Going back to the £5 billion investment, is there really an appetite from your shareholders to commit that sort of money in the long term?
You've got to look at who our shareholders are. So we have GIP, Global Infrastructure Partners. They're a shareholder who will hold their share in Gatwick for somewhere between 5 and 8 years. But then we have, and they've got about 42% share, but then beyond that, our shareholder base really is made up of sovereign wealth funds and pension funds, and some of the world's biggest. So to give you a flavour, we have ADIA, which is the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund. We have CalPERS, which is the Californian Public Servants Pension Fund. We have MPS, which is a South Korean public pension fund, and we have Future Fund of Australia. Yeah. So we've got a lot of firepower in the shareholder base, and of course what we need to do is to construct the business case. We do need to prevail through the Davies Commission, and if that were to be the case, then I'm sure that the investors of Gatwick would back this investment.
Have you got any sense at all for what the outcome will be of the Davies Commission review?
Well, I think for us, we don't think the island and the estuary will work. We just don't think it's deliverable or affordable. So that sort of parks that one to one side. I think if you then move across to expansion at Heathrow, because it is just in the wrong place, we think that environmentally it'll be very difficult to see how that would be delivered, politically very difficult too, which then really, we believe, should put us right at the centre of the debate and should put us in pole position, because from a deliverability point of view, we think that the likelihood of Gatwick being able to deliver the runway is high, certainly higher than delivering a runway, for example, at Stansted. If we look at the business case that's emerging, we think we are in the right place. We think we have got a very rich mix of airlines, and we have been hovering at around about the 30 to 35 million passenger mark now for the best part of 10 years. So we think the need is there to build it. And of course, what we do believe is if you follow this network of airports that we're proposing, what you will do is to create a competitive market. And that competitive market, in our view, can only be good for passengers and only be good for businesses, because it'll offer better choice, better value and better service levels. So we think that if we play our cards right, and if we apply ourselves, then there's no reason why, when we do get into 2015, we shouldn't be positioned as the best option.
And you talked about having a rich mix of airlines. I think, is it about 45% of your peak flights of EasyJet? Some people in this room may say that expansion of the airport means just more flights for EasyJet. Is that realistic, and is that a problem?
Well, I think if you look at, say, Gatwick today, one of the things we routinely see are 70 different airlines flying in and out of the airport. So we've got a very diverse mix of airlines, and we're working very hard to not only maintain that diverse mix, but to actually increase the mix of airlines at the airport. EasyJet are our biggest carrier, and we're very proud to have EasyJet as our biggest carrier. And we actually think in the last 3 years, since Carolyn McCall took the helm at EasyJet, that is a business that is really on fire.
Yep.
I mean, if you look at the performance from a service perspective, the marked change that Carolyn and her team have brought about is excellent to the passengers. If you look at the products that EasyJet now offer, you can get flexi fares, where if you're travelling on business, you pay a little bit more up front, but it means that if your business meeting overruns, you're guaranteed to catch the next plane. You can get an allocated seat now on board all EasyJet aircraft. That was introduced in November time. So if you're a business traveller, you can guarantee yourself one of the first 2 rows if it's important for you to get on and off the aircraft very, very quickly. So certainly EasyJet are moving very much into a business-friendly environment. And of course, if you look at their network, one of the strengths of the EasyJet network is that they actually fly from somewhere to somewhere. You know, they fly from a capital city to a capital city airport.
Yeah.
Whereas when you look at some of our competition elsewhere, they tend to fly to more secondary cities. EasyJet have carefully built their network so it is actually very business friendly. And they're moving to increase the business business passenger percentage of travellers higher all of the time. So I think EasyJet, they're about 35% of our passenger volume today. They're a very important part of our business. But there are a number of other airlines that we've brought in, the likes of Vietnam Airlines, Air China, Garuda to come, the likes of Turkish Airlines, Lufthansa, South Korean coming back this summer, as well as Norwegian. So there's a whole host of airlines that we've worked very hard to bring in, and we'll try to maintain that blend of choice for passengers. So we're happy to have EasyJet there.
Absolutely.
And I think for the business traveller, increasingly, we'll be trying to put in routes that fly to destinations that business travellers want to get to and from because they want to trade.
Exactly.